Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today. Welcome to our live webinar on the Seraphim SpaceTech VC Index for Q4. Despite the challenging macroeconomic environment, space had a strong 2023 and the total global investment equaled 22. This webinar will cover the previous quarter's funding and acquisition activity across the space industry. And today I'm pleased to welcome to discuss the topics today. We have Lucas Bishop.
Yep.
Hi Lucas. And Zainab, who are Seraphim Space investors. Thanks for joining me, guys.
No problem.
Hi, Zainab.
I was on mute. Hiya.
No worries. I was worried you couldn't hear me then. Right, thank you, guys. So let's get straight to it. And we're going to go run this in like a Q&A style format, as we normally do. But we'll pause for questions from the audience. But if you have any burning questions as we're going through, please post them in the chat and we'll pick them up as we go along, but we'll definitely get to some at the end, and we always love to hear the live questions. So, Lucas, I'll go to you first. Initially, in the data, what jumped out to you as developing into Q4 from Q3? Were there any surprises for you and the team?
Yeah, so I think 2023 got off to a pretty slow start as a result of rising interest rates, just generally a lot of economic uncertainty and a lot of businesses holding off investing until the picture cleared. So I think what I didn't anticipate coming into Q4 was actually a fairly reasonable recovery in this quarter. So I mean, ultimately we saw about $2 billion invested in Q4, and that was quite a jump from the previous quarter, which ultimately meant 2023 was basically on par in terms of investment into SpaceTech with 2022, and it's just something we didn't really anticipate because I mean 2023 had an exceptionally slow start. We also saw, I mean, throughout this year, and it's been a pretty much a continued unbroken trend, but there's been a continuous increase in the total number of deals that are being done within SpaceTech. Q4 was another record-breaking quarter with 127 SpaceTech deals completed globally. So maybe slightly less surprising on that front, but indicates some pretty healthy underlying activity within space. And I think we expect to see those businesses mature, and that will continue to kind of maintain a good backlog of businesses coming through into the later stages.
Well, that's great news to hear for the start of the year. Thanks for that, Lucas. Zainab, we'll go to you. As Lucas has mentioned, space sector remains strong, a 35% year-on-year drop across VC investing that we saw. What factors contributed to the resilience of the space industry against generalist VC investment?
Yeah, a lot of people are usually quite surprised to hear that space tech isn't really following the general VC trend. Is actually standing up against the downturn quite strongly. I think there's a lot of reasons for this. One of the main factors is that space tech actually affects a lot of real world applications. So when it comes to communications, positioning, navigation, and timing, for a lot of industries, they all depend on space tech and as well as the intelligence industry. And so it has a long-term strategic importance to a lot of large companies and governments. And so they will keep investing into it from their strategic point of view. Whereas maybe in traditional VC, you've got financially focused investors who are more disciplined on the returns they're going to get in the short term. And that's not the case for space tech. So despite the sort of economic status of the world, there's always an incentive to keep investing into space. And then the other thing sort of driving it is a lot of governments are trying to maintain their sovereign capabilities. And so you see a lot of individual countries spending a lot on their space tech budgets, and that's really contributed. So on the defense side, that's sort of standing up against the general VC downturn.
Thanks, Zainab. And talking about other countries, I think what was really interesting that, well, not countries, but corporate coming from Japan, like Marubeni, Mitsui, and Mitsubishi, and Toyota, sorry, you know, they have a huge influence on the space sector in 2023. What does this kind of investment signify for the future of the space industry?
Yeah, I think it's a really strong sign, considering all these sort of Japanese corporates. They're all really strong engineering companies. From that standpoint, they've been around for decades. So the fact that they can offer this long-term support, importance, and even just how to build large-scale infrastructure companies for the space tech companies they've invested into, is a really strong sign. And from their standpoint, they obviously want to secure their position as sort of global engineering leaders in the future. And the fact they've chosen SpaceTech as one of those verticals is really promising on the strategic importance of it moving forward.
And is that something new for this index that you've noticed?
It is definitely a new trend. We've seen that corporates in the APAC region have been like investing a lot more specifically in 2023. And I guess it's also, again, with that sort of that global reach that SpaceTech is starting to extend outside of the US. And there's a lot of growth in APAC as well.
Awesome, great to see. Lucas, you reported that the Beyond Earth sector experienced significant growth. What do you think the key drivers are for this?
Sorry, it was muted. Yeah, so Beyond Earth basically refers to the in-space economy, and it's been seeing a lot of growth pretty much in the last 2-3 years. When we look back before 2020, it was effectively an area that received little to no investment, like single-digit percentage points. I think even in 2020, it was like 1.5%. But in the most recent year, I think Beyond Earth made up a good 20, I forget what it was, 20-something% of total investment. So pretty significant. And why is this? I think there's a clear proliferation of, hardware in space, satellite businesses, and the more things you have up in space, the more demand there is for, businesses that could potentially service those satellites, businesses that could provide, I don't know, in the future, life extension, or data services. There are a few startups out there looking to provide like space weather data. So with more stuff in space, businesses are cropping up to service those needs. And then on the other side, I think there are also some sort of national and strategic imperatives relating to the in-space economy. This is a little bit more related to space stations. So I think we know that the ISS is eventually going to be deorbited at some point towards the end of the decade. And it's quite important for the West to maintain a presence in LEO for R&D in microgravity, for soft diplomacy, just have a continued presence and an edge in microgravity. So there needs to be an alternative solution, and there are a number of private companies now coming online and being heavily funded by both NASA's commercial LEO destination contracts and also by private investors who take a lot of comfort in seeing that NASA's completely committed to maintaining a presence in LEO. And basically, some of the biggest funding rounds of the last couple of years have been into businesses that are creating this next generation of space infrastructure and access. So, I mean, Axiom was one of the larger rounds this year, and they're developing a next-gen space station. Voyager, from our own portfolio, in a similar position. Sierra Space was responsible for one of the mega rounds in end of 2021 and has since raised another 350 million, I think, who are working on the Dream Chaser, but also were kind of in collaboration with Orbital Reef. So yeah, there's been a lot of activity, and it's become one of the key areas for investment over certainly 2023, but also quite meaningfully in the last year or two as well.
Awesome, thanks, Lucas. Zainab, back to you. The analyzed sector you reported, we did see a fall, unfortunately. But what factors do you think could help revive, this sector and revive interest with investors?
Yeah, I think the thing with analyzed businesses they're primarily downstream businesses. They're usually capex light, and they're taking in space data, and usually churning out analytics for businesses. And what we've seen is it's actually companies in the product category that have seen an increase. So what that tells us from the market, certainly the users of this data, the downstream users of this data, is they like data when it's productized and packaged, and with relevant insights for individual applications. So sort of general analyzed companies, say like Descartes Labs and Servest in the past, they've actually been subject to failures, and it's been quite public, and so you've got real world examples of where the market's sort of rejecting pure play analytics, and they're actually shifting towards businesses that have a productized offering, and it's actually quite useful as a data set. It's not a negative, because it tells startups what to focus on when they're going out to market. And usually, if you're a software, be quite capex light, and they should usually more time on their go to market and commercializing it after they've built out this. It is, I think it's quite constructive and useful information for analytics businesses going forward to be more centered towards real world applications and actually productizing what analytics and what insights they're churning out.
Yeah, great. Exactly. Great answer. I think, yeah, that can just only useful data to help these companies. Anyone got any questions? Please share them with us, and we'll continue to go through ours, but please don't be shy. Someone's saying hi to us. So hi, Christopher. Thanks for joining us. But we'll carry on. So in 2023, it marked a milestone in funding maturity, particularly with the highest investment flowing into Series C and growth rounds. How does this reflect the maturation of the space sector, Lucas?
Yeah, so I think both Series C and just growth generally saw a bit of a comeback towards the second half of this year. This quarter it was this year it was particularly noticeable in Series C. So last year there were only 9 Series C deals globally in all of 2022, which was down slightly from the year before in 2021, which was obviously the peak of the market. This year we've seen a very strong bounce back with 26 deals. So that's, I mean, you're talking almost 3 times the number of these later stage deals. And I think in part it indicates that, yes, generally the new space economy is generally more mature. There are more businesses out there fundraising for growth rounds. But I think also the recent environment has a pretty major impact on why there was such a concentration this year. I think end of 2022 it was a pretty tough year for fundraising, and a lot of businesses that were well capitalized going into 2022 avoided fundraising where they possibly could. And now that things are getting at least a little bit clearer, and equally, runways for some of these businesses might be getting a little bit on the short side, inevitably the more capex heavy businesses are coming back to market, and that's why we're seeing such an increase. And I think that's where we saw it particularly in Series C. So yeah, both driven by maturity, but also kind of recent economic trends as well.
Great, yeah, that makes sense. And what about UK deals? How do the UK deals listed in our index contribute to the diversity and the potential of the UK as a space sector?
Yeah, UK always has a surprisingly high number of deals, but lags a little bit more so in terms of total investment. So I think this year, in terms of investment, UK was 5th globally. I think it was US, China, and then maybe Japan and Germany that were ahead of the UK in total investment. But it seems that the UK has a lot of earlier stage businesses. So of the 26 deals, UK SpaceTech deals that happened this year, only 3 of them were growth stage. So these were Open Cosmos, Reaction Engines, and Resilience, which are 2 kind of more hardware focused businesses, and 1 kind of climate. So mix of hardware and software. But yeah, generally we see a lot of seed activity in the UK, a lot of pre-seed, a lot of seed activity within the UK. Generally slightly biased towards the hardware front, but and yeah, a limited number of really large deals that get done in the UK. I think the ones that have been done, I think we saw a few big deals in 2022, but they were largely kind of more climate related. So businesses using Earth observation data as one of their inputs. And I think largely around carbon credits. So Pachama, B0 Carbon, a few others in that kind of space were raising big rounds. So yeah, UK seems to be quite strong on climate, quite strong on the early stage, but limited amount of kind of late stage SpaceTech at the moment. Particularly, I think that for a while the UK stats were getting thrown off quite significantly purely by OneWeb, but since OneWeb isn't raising venture rounds anymore, they're not part of the data set for this year or the last one.
Do you have any data, or do you know if it's kind of UK investors investing in UK companies, or is it global? It will be global.
I ran some numbers on this a little while ago, but I don't have them to hand, to be honest.
So that just came to me. We can, if anyone wants to know the answer to that, we can answer that after. 2023 was a record-breaking year for SpaceTech in M&A, Zaina, with 30 transactions completed versus 22 in 2022. What are the interesting trends you noticed, and what do you think? Do you think this is going to continue through 24? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think it absolutely will continue through 2024. If anything, it's showing that the diversity of the people acquiring space tech businesses is expanding. And so one of the interesting points that we saw this year was there were more legacy space businesses acquiring new space startups than previous years. And so I think what that really shows is that legacy space businesses that have been leaders in the past and still are, they're wanting to maintain that position. So they're trying to shore up new space technologies to sort of maintain themselves and stay competitively positioned in the new space industry, which is a good sign. And then you've also got the private equity players who are acquiring businesses just because the industry is sort of reaching that point of consolidation. And so we saw Advent acquire Maxar and KKR take the satellite manufacturer OHB private as well. So in the next year, we'll probably see a few more take privates as well, just as new space businesses maybe struggle to fundraise in a public market and they turn to private equity, which it'll be fairly normal in this sort of fundraising environment. And then old space legacy business trying to maintain that business because for a while in 2022 we did see Nice and sort of beat out legacy players. So it's interesting to see that back in the space again.
You broke up a bit at the end. I don't know if it was me or not, but I kind of missed what you said at the end. Yes, Zaina, we can't hear you, unfortunately. Can you talk? This always happens to someone, unfortunately. But okay, Lucas, maybe we'll go to you. Lucas, are you okay to pick up a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So one of our listeners has asked about cleaning up space junk in space. Will this be done by offering contracts out to the private sector? And how will this affect Q4? I mean, we in Seraphim invest in some space junk companies. I don't know if you want to tell everyone a little bit about them and tell us what your opinion is.
Yeah, I don't know if, well, I'm sure the UN won't be offering out contracts themselves to clean up space junk, and it is a good question. Ultimately, who's going to pay? I think generally, with the exception of maybe a few specific, targets that get identified that are worth deorbiting, and some of the contracts I think have been offered to clear space to demonstrate deorbiting. I think really the better approach to space junk is in terms of prevention. And interestingly, 2023 saw the first space debris fine issued from the US for a company, and I'm forgetting blanking on the details, but essentially for remaining in orbit too long after the end of their mission, with the new guidelines saying 5 years. So I think enforcement like that, fines for businesses that whose missions extend beyond when regulations state that they can remain in orbit, is probably going to be the most effective broad way to regulate space junk.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an important one. I think one we get asked a lot. So Yes, thanks for that, Lucas. And Zainab, you're back. Great. We can hear you now, I think, I hope.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Anything you want to add about what you think about space junk, what you think about might happen?
No, I think obviously Lucas covered most of it from when my connection went back up, but I think we can't really speak for the UN and what they'll do, obviously, but I think there's certainly a lot of private companies that are solving the problem, like one of our portfolio companies, Astroscale. And so in the past, when governments can't use their own technology, they have turned to the private sector. So I imagine they'll do something to trying to clean up space junk.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. Well, I think we're actually running out of time, but if anyone has any further questions, the guys will be happy to answer them in the chat. They can just post them as you do now, and we can go back in and answer them if you think of something post live, and you'll be able to re-watch the video should you want to at any time. So it'll be on our page. So thank you for joining me today. It's our first webinar back of 24. We'll be doing one a month on various different topics. So keep your eye on our social media. But thanks, guys. And I should say, actually, the index is on our website in research, but also all over our social media if you want to have a look.
Awesome.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Yes. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.